Welcome to Kingdom Now, the podcast featuring faith with an edge, as we celebrate the kingdom of God within you. I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Marino, apostle, author, and theologian, and founder of Spitfire Apostolic Ministries and all the works that go along with it. I'm excited to share this program with you as we explore the ins and outs of counterculture Christianity present as you live out the kingdom of God in your everyday life. Want to learn more? Visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. And now, our program, which features a variety of formats here just for you. Interviews, teaching and preaching proclaimed everywhere from my North Carolina studio to Sanctuary and beyond. And powerful insights here for now as we turn the world upside down everywhere we go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. And to our listeners in New Zealand, we say kia ora. We hope that whatever time of day it is when you are listening, that you are having a good one. And I welcome you to this edition of the Kingdom Now podcast. And I am your host, Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino, here as the Spitfire, serving as the voice of counterculture Christianity, where we feature the theme of faith with an edge. And if you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. It's not uncommon for me to get requests to do relationship episodes, to tap into things that are on the minds of people, especially those in modern times, because let's get real, relationships can be really difficult to navigate. And I believe personally that the way relationships are often handled today, through things such as internet dating, introduce a whole new world of communication issues that open the door for miscommunication, which means we then have to try and figure all of that out. But there are also things we take with us when trying to date, advice and things pertaining to relationships that are often from bygone eras, things our parents, guardians, grandparents, even other well-meaning adults dropped along the way that have infiltrated the way we see relationships that are not always helpful. Now, I don't think that anyone deliberately gave these tidbits, which tend to be quite universal, to harm us, to cause us problems later on. They were sharing advice perhaps they received, or things that shaped the way they saw the world and they saw relationships. And in a weird way, I believe they were trying to be helpful. But sometimes those tidbits kind of get in there and are keeping us from assessing relationships as we should. Not to mention having some objectivity about them and the people we pursue. They keep us from honestly examining situations and our ability to see things as they are rather than as we are. Adults have concern for kids, and maybe there's a place for that. But they often expect us to process and reason their logic when it's not ours. So they are imposing what they feel they know on us, and contrary to belief, the way they narrate the world is not always correct. And sometimes their concerns and their narrations carry over into our adulthood, into places and ways that can upset us. So in this episode, we're going to go over 10 things our parents told us about relationships, and also look at what's really true therein, so we can start to separate truth from fiction and get in a better place for ourselves as adults and young adults for those who listen to this podcast, who are still teenagers, because there are a few of you out there. Number 1, having any issues at all means you aren't ready for a relationship. If you grew up in the 90s like I did, or in subsequent decades, you probably were told something to this extent at one time or another. How this particular myth came into being, at least I believe, was through the rise of therapy as an industry. Now, I have nothing against going to therapy or believing you need therapy or seeking out a therapist. But what happened in the 90s was a big push for people to dive into the realm of healing. And that often meant seeking out a therapist to go over different issues that one had. And the common idea at the time was if you had all these issues, that's the reason your relationships were overall unsuccessful. And you needed to, quote unquote, take time to heal before trying to pursue another relationship because they were all going to be as unsuccessful as the previous ones because you were unhealed. Now, I'm all for taking time to try and work out issues. I think working out issues is a great thing to do. And yes, sometimes we do need some time and space to figure out who we are through the process because situations, experiences, etc. can change us and by proxy change what we are looking for in a relationship. So yes, sometimes we do need to not be in a relationship for a little while, but it's not for the same reason that they are saying. If we give the message that people aren't worthy of love or of being in a relationship because they have issues, that can turn into something both toxic and hurtful over time because it changes the way we perceive and see ourselves. Relationships aren't rewards for healing or doing well in one's life. They are part of life. And if I might add, I've been in relationships at some of the most difficult healing junctures of my life, at points where I didn't know how I was going to get through. And those relationships became part of my healing process. There can be something cathartic about going through a difficult time and having someone there while you go through it. And no, it's not all the time, and maybe it's not for everyone. But we need to divorce the idea of worthiness from relationships. You, as a person, just as you are worthy of love and connection with others. And I feel it's also worth mentioning that friendships are essential through any healing process, and any serious partnered relationship you have should complement and be part of that. You know, I saw a meme once, some time back, where it basically said something to the extent that you need to have a support system so that you're not so clingy and needy, and so that when relationships go south, you have the support to pick up and go forward and to move on instead of always feeling like the world is ending. You and only you can decide if a relationship is right for you and when it's right or not right. You don't have to have everything figured out to be relationship ready. And beyond this, you also have the reality that sometimes we don't know where relationships are going to take us. You know, it's wonderful to want to have the foresight to see where everything is going to go and understand where things are going to go and to know the end from the beginning when things start. And the reality is that most people don't have that. And as nice as that might be when we are in relationships or we are confronted with them, we don't always know what's going to happen. So it's all right to not have all the answers. It's all right to see where things go. It's also all right to kind of sit back and sit things out and maybe not engage for a while. The bottom line is that it's all right for you to do what's right for you when it comes to relationships. And that's true when it comes to being in one or not being in one. Number 2, all relationships lead to sex. I would say a lot of people believe this myth, even if it's contrary to their experience, because it most likely is. We've been fed this story that everyone we come across, everyone we meet, especially in terms of the sexual binaries, such as the context of the opposite sex, is anticipating and wants to have sex with us at all times and without any sort of clarity. The myth behind this, in the bigger sense, is that every relationship we have with others inevitably leads to sex, or is designed to lead to sex, so we need to have our guard up at all times. And that guard is going to be relevant as we move further into this episode and discuss more about these different dynamics as we go along. Now, there are a few reasons why this message can be bad. I'd almost say why it can be downright dangerous. For one, it sets up a certain level of expectation that I feel is unreasonable. Because no, not every relationship is about sex or leads to sex. There are entire relationships that are platonic friendships, where nary a naked body comes into play. And those relationships are vital in our lives. I don't know about any of you, but I don't know where I'd be without my friends. And in some ways, those relationships are both more significant and more of a communal building block than that with my significant other. And why do I say that? Because of all the reasons I mentioned from the meme earlier. Whenever I've gone through a breakup or a traumatic experience with my partner, or sometimes just need to talk about something, my friends are the ones who hold me up and keep me accountable. And for the most part, they are consistent, whereas more serious relationships aren't always as consistent. But giving the impression that everyone just wants sex and every relationship is about that devalues friendships, it devalues different types of connection, and it keeps us from exploring those fully in our lives. Not to mention, it gives people a huge swollen ego, thinking the whole world is out to sleep with them. Because no, the entire world doesn't want to have sex with you, or with everyone else for that matter. So yeah, imagine the miscommunication that this kind of message can create. No, not all relationships lead to sex, nor are they meant to, and those that don't lead to sex are just as important and as vital to our well-being as those that do, among those who are looking for that. Number 3, everyone is having sex. Of all the myths I both contemplated and explored, I think this one has a special damage to it because it creates a sense of competition in our minds as well as a feeling of inferiority if we aren't doing what quote-unquote everyone else is doing. I think our parents narrated life this way from their own perspectives growing up. When you're a teenager and you're in your early 20s, it can feel like the entire world is having sex, especially if you're not. And now that they have children, they are concerned not that you're going to feel left out for not having sex, but that you're going to be one of those kids who is having sex. Thus, they are imposing their concerns and perceptions of life onto you. So the first thing I think I need to say is that everyone is not having sex regardless of their age. That is a complete and total myth. This is true even more now since we've had the pandemic. I remember when I was on various dating sites how surprised I was at the number of men who admitted it had been well over a year since they'd been with anyone. I had a few who admitted it had been 4 or 5 years or more, and the reasons for that varied. Some were very busy with work, or were in situations where they were traveling regularly for their jobs, and as a result, they couldn't hold down a relationship with anyone. Some just didn't want to be involved with anyone they knew, and they didn't want to be involved with anyone, period. And this is true at any age. Not all teens, not all people in their early 20s are having sex. Some are really into school. Some are busy with different activities. Some are new to the job force. Some have decided they aren't ready yet. And some just aren't having sex because for whatever reason, they just don't want to. There is no everybody is doing it when it comes to sex. And sex is one of those things that we have to decide for ourselves when we are ready and want to or don't want to. And don't let anyone convince you otherwise. We shouldn't feel pressured or shamed to keep up with others in this area. Certainly like we need to keep up or that we aren't keeping up because of something our parents told us or our friends told us or anyone else told us for that matter. Number 4, men don't want to marry or commit. As someone who was raised as a girl, a lot of the advice I was given and the girls I also knew were given tended to be very negative toward men. One of the major things we were told was that men never want to marry or make a commitment to a woman, so we need to be careful of men. And I'm not going to say that people don't need to be careful. I'm not saying we don't require caution in our interactions with others, because that's true regardless of who we are attracted to or who we want to date. Caution is a thing that's just a good practice. But the way things were often portrayed, at least in my perception, kind of left a feeling of hopelessness in me. The idea that men didn't ever want to get married or commit or go anywhere, it kind of, was like, what do we do with that then? Now, what I've found is that just like women and non-binary people are all different, men are all different too. And just like everyone else, some of them want to get married and some of them don't. But it is absolutely untrue that all men don't want to get married or make a commitment. When I was on online dating sites, I talked to a lot of different men over those few years, and there was definitely not just one perspective or opinion about things like commitment and relationships and marriage. If I'm going to be honest, I talked to many more men who were interested in commitment and marriage than I expected. Now, they might not have wanted to marry me, but that's beside the point. There were many who were serious about relationships and marriage. And maybe at some point in time they weren't, but at least when I spoke to them, they were. If you know you want to get married ultimately and you seek a male mate and the guy you're with doesn't want to commit, someone out there does, so stop wasting your time and find him. Number 5, men think through their dick. Another prominent male stereotype, we find the message that men only want sex. Now, sometimes I think if I was a man, I'd be offended by some of the casual statements that are made about men within general society. If we listen to what might be considered pop culture advice, it sounds like men are commitment phobic, controlled only by sexual drives and nothing else, thinking about nothing but sex all the time, and only seeking to make conquests out of unsuspecting people, usually assumed to be women. And what I will say to this stereotype is that there are plenty of women and plenty of people of other genders who might also think about sex constantly or aim to make conquests out of people. So to make that a specifically male characteristic isn't fair and doesn't give men credibility for doing or thinking about anything else. So let's clarify. Yes, most men do think about sex, but studies have shown they don't think about it any more often than anyone else. With the exception of perhaps much of the asexual community, who obviously are not necessarily, as a rule, as sexually engaged as others. But whether somebody's asexual or not, or male or not, sex is not the only thing that men think about. They also think like other people about things like work and careers and life and jobs and circumstances that they face and paying bills. In fact, there's growing evidence that the pressures of life are also a strong consideration for men, and there are many who are drowning under the weight of it. I'm all for a good conversation about the pressures on women and the things society does to women, and the way that things aren't often fair for women. Those are all facts. But we can't just talk about one set of issues when there are multiple issues out there. And like it or not, things such as suicide and mental health and other issues are also part of the things men face. So there's a lot of things men think about and many things men consider when it comes to a relationship or things that they look for in a relationship, and it's not all about sex all the time. Yes, there are men that are gross and disgusting and inappropriate, particularly if you're on a dating site or you're somewhere on social media. But once again, I would say that's not a unique trait to men, and that's also not all men. So as much as we don't like stereotypes, we also should be conscientious of not perpetuating them either. Number 6, you have to have everything in common to make a relationship work. Opposites attract is a saying for a reason, and I believe it's an important statement when it comes to relationships. But despite its universal appeal, we still treat opposites as a bad thing in a relationship. Our parents used to tell us that the more we had in common in a marriage relationship, the better. And on the surface, this doesn't sound like bad advice. It sounds like something someone might say that seems kind of obvious, right? Like if you all go to the same church and have the same interests and do the same jobs, it should all work out perfect for you, right? This folk advice doesn't consider the vast numbers of people who had everything in common and still wound up divorced for whatever reason. But underlying their commonalities, no matter how many of them there were or how many they might have felt were priorities, couldn't keep them together. And that's important because no matter how many things you have in common with someone, you are going to reach something that you don't have in common. And you have to be prepared to handle that. When you have so much in common and you are fascinated and in love with those commonalities, and that's all you look at, you aren't preparing for differences. There isn't a secret prescription to marriage, making a marriage work, or what makes a marriage work at that. I know it's tempting to try and boil marriage difficulties down to a few cliche answers, but marriage is more than just a few trite sayings. It's also more than a few problems that emerge as married life goes forward. And if we are focusing too much on the commonalities of a relationship, we aren't preparing people to handle what they don't have in common. No matter how much you have in common with someone, you have to learn how to communicate. Part of learning marriage is learning how to communicate, both what your needs, wants, feelings, thoughts are, and how to understand how your partner also communicates with you at the same time. Most of the time, people are attracted or wind up with someone who is different from them, different in specific ways that help to fill in gaps and meet needs in a relationship that can't be resolved if two people are too alike. We need differences in relationships, and we need to celebrate those differences because they are important. Commonalities will not cause a cease in communication. Number 7, relationships need to be conventional to be successful. I hope this piece of advice has gone out of vogue in the past 30 years, but I do know better because this conventional piece of advice still circulates, advocating for convention. You know the drill. A relationship needs to be between a heterosexual couple, with the man taking the lead and the woman following behind with their 2.3 children in a minivan and a house with a picket fence. And what I want to say up front is that there is an upsurge in traditional relationship ideals, such as the trad wife trend on social media. And if indeed you're doing this type of thing and it works for you, then more power to you. I hope it goes as well as you feel it is right now. I get the temptation to run from secular work, from the rat race that is society, in favor of focusing more on family and home and making those things a priority. And there's no judgment in what I'm saying. I believe fundamentally that feminism is supposed to be about doing what's right for you. And if this is your choice, made without persuasion and because it's what you really want to do and feel is right for your family, then do it. And I'm not going to say anything otherwise. At the same time, there's also nothing wrong with being a working mom or a working woman or a woman in a relationship that's not traditional, whether it's with a man or another woman or someone non-binary or agender or whomever they so choose. And the part that we need to understand is success is a subjective idea. And we are going to discuss this more in the next point that I will discuss. So if being successful to you means having a spotless house, homesteading, homeschooling your kids, and cooking dinner from scratch every night, then go for it. But it doesn't mean that's what everyone aspires to do or sees as success. And we need to be open to different ideas of success to support and celebrate others. Relationships aren't successful based on their conventionality. They are successful because the people in them make them work, and they are able to do so because they find a rhythm and methods that work best for them. So what might seem like an ideal situation to you might not work for someone else. Or it might work partially for someone with another part that also works differently. And there's nothing wrong with different, and we need to open up our minds to the fact that there's no wrong way to have a relationship, as long as they aren't toxic or abusive in some form. Different isn't the enemy, and it is to be expected that different relationships consist of different people and situations. Number 8, your ultimate goal should be to be a power couple. Related to the last question, this point wasn't often stated to us by our parents in this way, but it was somehow implied. It's stated more than likely that we should aim to marry someone who bears a stereotypical outlook of success. So we are encouraged to pursue financially profitable workaholics, people who have the goal of making a lot of money. And in the power couple ideal, that should be what the relationship is based on. Two people coming together to be financially successful and have a lot of power because you have a lot of money. First, we come back to the idea we discussed earlier about success, that your definition of success doesn't have to look like this. If you are happy having a good marriage and a family, however you define that, and not spending all your time in the pursuit of work, then there's nothing wrong with this. A few years ago, I made the decision that I wasn't really interested in pursuing a relationship with someone else, also in ministry, to push and struggle to be on top of everything and everyone all the time. Maybe at the end of the day, I don't want to talk about ministry nonstop. I want to settle in and have a nice dinner and spend some time with someone that I don't have everything in common with and enjoy something of my life. And I came to this conclusion because I spent a lot of years pushing and trying to make things work, and they don't work like that. Maybe I want to enjoy parts of my life while there is time left, and there's nothing wrong with this either. Second, venturing to be a power couple seems appealing, but it's also a lot of work, often in different directions, and what comes along with this level of pressure is a lot of stress. I wonder if many couples who are pushing to be someone through their relationships were able to sit back and relax some if their relationships would be better. Your marriage, your relationships do not have to look like a social media posting, most of which are staged to begin with. It has to look like what you want it to be. And we need to stop competing in our relationships with relationships and ideals that don't really exist. Number 9, relationships are hard. I'm going to be careful with this one because the truth is that there are aspects of relationships that can be difficult. They require us to stretch and communicate as people, and the way we are expected to do so challenges us as people. That's part of their purpose. Life doesn't work if it's all about us all the time. But there's a difference between a relationship requiring work and working a relationship, and that's the difference therein. Giving the impression that relationships are quote-unquote hard makes one not understand the difference between having a hard time and a relationship just not working. And yes, sometimes relationships just don't work, no matter what the people in them might do to try and make them work. And this means that, relationships shouldn't feel like a punishment. They shouldn't feel like some impossible test that we're trying to pass. We need to know the differences between healthy and unhealthy relationships rather than branding them all as hard. Number 10, you can't get out of a relationship once you get in one. A lot of people like the idea of taking divorce off the table. And I'm going to say that the relationship I'm currently in, it's our prerogative to say that we're stuck with each other and that eventual divorce isn't an option. But that being said, that's our choice and our personal language and has a lot to do with how we interact with each other. But if things really reached a point where they were unbearable, neither of us would expect to stay like that forever. And it is unfortunate that thinking in this lens is often considered a requirement of life, but it is. When we first get into relationships, we can't fathom the idea where you won't be able to stand that side of that person. But it does happen sometimes. And sometimes it happens within a couple of weeks of being in the relationship. There are stories of people who found themselves there within a month or within a week or two. And it's an uncomfortable conversation that people don't want to have. so they don't prepare for the possibility by making sure divorce is an option if it's necessary. When I do premarital counseling and marital counseling alike, taking divorce off the table isn't a thing there, because nobody should feel trapped in a relationship that just doesn't work. Instead of making it sound like relationships are death sentences, it's far more constructive to consider growth and talk about what growth looks like. And if you're having issues, how you can best resolve those, even if it involves taking time apart, rather than making such forceful ultimatums. As I stated in the beginning, I don't think anyone intended to harm us with the advice and quips we've discussed today. People tend to narrate through experience, and experience can be a great thing or it can be a deceitful thing. And what I mean by that is it can easily cloud us into seeing things from an emotional perspective that doesn't guide us into clear thinking. It can also drive us into rebellious places where we are contrary or difficult, or do the opposite of what someone says just to do the opposite. And that's not healthy either. We can't make our relationship decisions based on advice, on opinions, or what others see for us. And at the end of the day, I believe that's part of why we were given this advice. Our parents, guardians, maybe other well-meaning adults were trying to influence and shape the kind of person we wanted to be for ourselves. They didn't want us just running off and doing things because they felt everyone else was going to do them. And whatever they might have had in mind, we aren't kids anymore. The things we want and seek have changed. And our relationships are our own decisions to make now. They're not theirs. If they use these different points of advice and it led them to relationship success, then more power to them. But sitting here today, looking out at the vast number of people I knew who gave this advice, I know better. And I think if we are honest with ourselves and stop judging relationships by superficial things, such as longevity rather than quality, we can all admit that the people who handed out advice like candy probably shouldn't have been so free with it. Just as we grow in other ways, we also have to grow in our perspective of advice. I don't like to say that relationships are all trial and error, but truth be told, all relationships do have that component. We have to be in them to figure out what we want and what we are looking for. Now, with marriage, ideally, we don't marry to get in and then out when things don't work out. So with long-term relationships, there needs to be the option for growth. And that's where stuff goes bad, because people don't anticipate the growth and change that comes about as we age, as our relationships change due to other changes, such as children leaving home, moving, job losses, death. We don't consider that as life changes, so do people, and their priorities, interests, and pursuits also follow. Relationships require us to find room for change. Change for ourselves, change for our partners, and ultimately change for our relationships. And finding that balance takes a lifetime. I thank you for listening to this episode of the program. And if you would like some reading material that can help you with some of the things we've talked about on here today, I recommend 2 of my books this week. The first is The Wedding Workbook, Your 4-Month Guide to the Marriage of Your Dreams. That's The Wedding Workbook, Your 4-Month Guide to the Marriage of Your Dreams. Now, I know it says it's for weddings, but it can be used for vow renewals. It can be used for people who are looking maybe to get married one day. It can be used for people who just want to have better relationships. And my book, Discovering Intimacy, A Journey Through the Song of Solomon. That's Discovering Intimacy, A Journey Through the Song of Solomon. Look me up, Dr. Leanne B. Marino, wherever books are sold, and all of my titles will come up, 35 in total, plus a few more getting ready to be released. So, something out there for everyone, both paperback and ebook available, and hardcover coming later this year. Dr. Leanne B. Marino. Remember, search for me wherever books are sold. Also, I encourage my Patheos column at patheos.com/blogs/leadership on fire. That's patheos.com/blogs/leadership on fire. That blog is for anyone interested in anything having to do with leadership. So definitely go and check that out today and find a bunch of topics that will definitely be of interest to you right where you are right now. Also, if you would like to contact me on social media, follow me at Kingdom Power Now. That's at Kingdom Power Now. And let's talk, let's share, let's discuss. Let me know what you'd like to hear on this program. Give feedback and so on. At Kingdom Power Now across social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WordPress, and beyond at Kingdom Power Now. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. That's kingdompowernow.org. Also, if you are looking for affordable ministry training that you can do from home and you will use everything that you learn, check out Apostolic Covenant Theological Seminary at acts176.org. That's acts176.org. And also, if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area and you are interested in finding your found family, because family means that nobody gets left behind or forgotten, feel free to check us out at welcomeinthisplace.org. That's welcomeinthisplace.org for the world that is Sanctuary Fellowship International Tabernacle. And if there's any question that you have that is not answered on the site, feel free to reach out and we will definitely get back to you. And this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you in closing that relationships require understanding both of ourselves and others. And the longer we pursue to bring that about, the better off our relationships will be. Until next time, be blessed. Thank you for joining us on Kingdom Now. I pray it proves to be a blessing in your life. To learn more about this work, ask a question, submit feedback or a topic suggestion, advertise on air, or donate to this work, visit my website, which contains essential information and links for other points of contact around the web at kingdompowernow.org. Also, if you are in our area and would like to visit Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle SIFT, visit welcomeinthisplace.org. Until next time, this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you that the kingdom of God is within you, and that means the kingdom is now.